for 6 years, lived in China for 2 of those years, others in Asia region. So that's in the finance industry. So that's a bit about me. What do I think about China as a whole? I think it's going to get harder to get money out. You see, since 2018, from the trade war tensions, they're bringing in restrictions for foreigners, what they can do, what they can't do. Plus, China wants yuan. It wants to make the RMB the currency of the world. It wants to take over that US dollar role, so it can get into debt even more, and just use it to leverage their economy to push it up, like the US uses the US dollar, so it can just print more money because it's got people who'll go to it. China wants to do that with yuan, so it doesn't want you to take money out. So I think it's going to make it increasingly harder with the coronavirus, because the GDP levels are going, or not as far as the 7% they were previously. And China's going to make it a lot harder, I see, because they'll want to keep money in now, because they haven't got as much money, as much coming in from imports, exports as they would have done, as estimated this year. As far as getting money out, there's several ways. I think Adam's summed it up perfectly on one of his blogs where he's done getting money out of China. The ways to get it out, it is definitely not easy, and I wouldn't advise doing it through your bank account, because I had a look through Shanghai Pudong Bank and the rates were awful. There is lots of different ways. I think we'll touch on a few later. How to get it out if you've got businesses or just an individual, on how to get it out. But there is a few ways you can get it out without paying the kind of extortionate fees from the banks, especially the Chinese banks as well, they do offer. So yeah, that's what I think about China. The direction it's going to make it a bit tougher, and they want to keep the RMB in China, so they're just. I think you're going to see the legislations just push up even more so this year as well, and as we're going to see with the trade wars, even today, it's just going to look like it's not going to go away anytime soon.
Absolutely, and I think the interesting thing is that one of the trends which is happening at the moment is completely the opposite of what was happening 10 or 15 years ago. So when China was just focusing on manufacturing, they wanted to weaken the RMB. When many foreigners wanted to buy the RMB, the Chinese were actually trying to stop it getting too strong. Whereas now, most analysts think that if the currency was just freely floating, it would actually weaken a lot against the USD especially. However, I think the Chinese government seem quite content to see a small devaluation. So it's been going down from 1 to 6 to now I think it's 7.05 or 7.07, whatever. But the general trend is towards a weaker against the USD. And I think as long as it's not too extreme, the Chinese government are more than happy to see it go to 7.3, 7.5, even 8, because at the end of the day, there's this trade war, and obviously the world economy is going to be struggling for 1 or 2 years. If they can help their manufacturers, even though China's mainly a domestic economy now in any way, I think that they're more than happy to do that. But they don't want to see something extreme where the RMB weakens by half, and it's like 14 to the dollar or something like that. So they're still kind of trying to control the situation. Before we go to the question and answers as well, I wanted to briefly touch on some of the options you have for sending money out of China, depending on how much you have. So basically, if you have very small amounts of money, because even people who want to send out a larger amount of money, some people want to just send out small amounts, like a few hundred a month in addition to a larger amount, just for, I don't know, costs or whatever. There are some good apps now, like I think it's called Swapsy or whatever. It's not perfect, but for really small amounts, those peer-to-peer apps, I think, can actually work pretty well. So that works. Above 50,000 US dollars or 50,000 pounds at least, I think currency companies can work. We're going to have a chat with a guy called Andy, who's going to be a bit late for this meeting, but he is coming in 5 or 10 minutes, and he'll answer some of your questions as well. So above 50,000 or maybe 60,000, that's kind of the rate where if you're looking to buy a house, currency companies can sometimes beat what the banks offer depending on how much. And especially if it's a big amount, like 500,000, 1 million, whatever, it gets cheaper for businesses or whatever. Also, if you want to kill two birds with one stone, if you have a Chinese Visa or MasterCard as opposed to Union Pay, it's easier to do something like invest, whether that's $1,000 a month, $1,000, euros, whatever, into an investment account, so that basically when you go out of China in say 10 or 15 years, you can withdraw to an account on the other side. So especially if right now you're sending money out of China to contribute to an investment in your home country, it is possible to kill two birds with one stone. We'll talk about some of the processes there as well. I'm going to go now to some question and answers, and we already have a few which we collected beforehand, because some people said that they couldn't attend today, but they want us to record it and answer some of their questions. One question we had from a guy was basically asking about the exchange rates, but we've covered that already. But also beyond that, in terms of for businesses, do we think it's going to get harder to get money out of China, and also for individuals? Now, Henry's partially covered that, but what about for businesses rather than individuals, Henry? Do you see any trends there, or do you think it's just going to get harder across the board?
Yeah, I think for businesses, again, when they introduced in 2018 the whole kind of China tax system, reformed it. It was a kind of push in the way China was going. It wasn't just for expats, the tax and the restrictions. It was just on businesses together to really clamp down and kind of a statement from China to say, this is what we're doing. We are going to chase up on tax now for the Chinese. And I think that was a general consensus of the way it was going, that Chinese governments are looking to do things. So by the book, or as by the book as China does it, and do things stricter. So yeah, I see it going quite. I see it going quite hard, a lot harder for businesses to do things, and just also from a personal perspective now in China, it's getting a lot harder to do things. For example, you need citizenship ID to get on the bus or book trains. They implemented the WeChat. I don't know what you call it, but the ID sensor where you get a report card on your individual kind of status, and that determines what you can buy, etc. Depending on how good you are. So if you cross a road, they can censor it. So for example, so I think for businesses, it's going to become very hard to get money out of China, because the censorship that China has and the way that China is looking to go for the taxes and businesses and keeping it in China. So yeah, I see that as a potential challenge for businesses in the future to get money out of China.
Absolutely. And Andy Parsons has joined us, and as I mentioned before, one of the options is a currency company, and Andy is part of a currency company in the UK. And the question that was just asked, Andy, and I'm curious to know your take on this, is basically a question that asked, would it be, do you, even though we can't see the future, right, is it likely that in the future it's going to get harder to get money out of China? And what Henry was saying is basically the trend is towards maybe more protectionism or whatever. What do you see? I mean, obviously we can't predict the future for sure, but do you think by next year or in 2 years, is your currency company, expecting it to get harder to get money out of China or not?
Yeah, it's the easy answer. It's not easy now. Every case we deal with is a case by case basis, because there's obviously a lot of issues with getting money out of China now, but obviously with what's going on around the world, I can see there'll be tougher and tougher restrictions. I have to say, I mean, the business partners we have that we use for Hong Kong, China, they are using legitimate ways of doing this, but they have to be very clever in what they do. And I'm sure they're probably somewhere around, they are using some loopholes, and I'm sure some of those will be closed. So yeah, we shall see what happens.
Well, that's a very good point you made, because even though China's relatively strict, there are quite a few perfectly legal loopholes, like most countries, but that can be exploited. But as you say, over time, the Chinese government have been closing down these. Because I can remember there was a case a few years ago with the Chinese celebrity Fan Bingbing, and basically, of course, that was a bit political and whatever, but partially it was related to tax as well. So basically, the government they are trying to kind of close down even some larger loopholes and have a tighter control, I guess, not just when it comes to tax getting money out of China, but tighter control in general of the economy. We've got another question here on the chat function. How long would you say it takes to complete the process for one payment? So, Andy, when it comes to I know it's how long is a piece of string, you can't know exactly, but on average, if it's one payment, let's take a smaller payment, $100,000 or $50,000 compared to, say, a business with $1 million or whatever, millions.
Yeah.
What's the broad averages? It must be a big difference between different cases, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, just to give an idea, if, for example, it's a person that wants to move $100,000, the process of actually setting up an account for them is less than a day to do the regulation, anti-money laundering protocols, etc. Once that account's set up, the money can be transferred and it's done in a day. So it's the same day basis. So it would be in effect the next day, for example, for Hong Kong. So the money, we would give a rate, and then that morning, money would be transferred. And depending on time zones, it should be received. I mean, we've done one recently for a bank in the US. It went via London. So it actually showed in their US bank account the same day, although it was classed as a pending payment, and they actually got it downloaded into their account the following day. So it's very quick. Not usually an issue. It does depend. I mean, another example, we were contacted by a company who were looking, a Chinese tech company, who were looking to move 90 million US dollars into a Europe investment fund. Now, that took a little bit longer because to move $90 million, especially going into an investment outside of China, isn't easy. So what we've managed to do is set up like a mirror of that fund in China. So they've invested into China as such, and then once that money's in that fund, we're then able to move it into a fund outside of China. It's like its sister fund. So that's another way of doing it. But again, 90 million, it can be done in one go. It's usually 100 million in one go is probably the maximum per day we could do without raising flags. So.
Well, would you say, though, in general, though, for smaller payments, let's say if an individual wants to send out 50,000, 70,000, 100,000, would you say that makes it quicker than if it's like millions of a business, or it doesn't really make much difference because it's the same processes, anti-money laundering and so on?
Yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, it's actually quicker for us to set up an account for an individual because we only need proof of ID and an address. Whereas obviously for a business, a corporate account, we need proof of all the directors.
Yes.
Also what that business does. We also probably will need some form of bank statement somewhere along the line to prove there's money going in and out of the account, because obviously China's like any other country. We have to prove that we know what our clients are doing with their money, where it's coming from, where it's going to. Mm-hmm. So it's quicker and more straightforward if it's an individual just looking to send some money.
Yeah, absolutely. Because obviously when it comes to an individual, the anti-money laundering documents, you have proof of address, proof of ID, just like an investment account, and maybe some questions.
Yes, exactly.
But for a business, right, you've maybe got to ascertain things like, what structure are they in? If it's too much of an opaque structure, and yes, those kind of things, it raises questions, right? So,
I mean, if it's a large amount as well, we would normally have a source of wealth questionnaire as well. I mean, if it's properties being sold, there's usually proof. They can send a document to say, I've sold a property, and this is where the funds are coming from. So as long as we're happy with what we've seen and who we're working with, then there's no issue.
Yeah, absolutely. any financial services provider just needs to make sure they're not dealing with a secret criminal or terrorist.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's a question here. What documents or information do we need to provide for the transfer? Now, I think you partially answered that in terms of proof of ID, proof of address,
Yes.
for companies, any company documentation, but also in addition to that, I guess, if they've sold their Chinese home, as an example, they might need to provide proof that they've sold that home, even if it's in Chinese language or something.
If it's a smaller amount, we won't necessarily, because it could be just savings, for example. But I mean, if you've got an individual and they want to transfer, let's say, $5 million, we will ask the question where that come from, and if it's a sale of a business, sale of a property, investments, whatever it is, if we've got some sort of proof somewhere that where it's come from, that makes it a lot easier, because obviously we can't be seen to be just transferring money left, right, and centre that we don't know where it's come from, where it's going to. So we have to have some sort of due diligence in that.
Of course, yeah, just to make sure everything's done properly and there's no illegal behaviour as well, right? Especially if it's came from cash or whatever, we don't know whether.
No, we don't deal with cash.
If you see, in the bank statement, something just came through in cash. But these days, of course, the banks don't just require.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, life has become easier. I mean, I remember my days way back when I was an IFA as well, years and years ago. I mean, I went to a client's once, and he had £50,000 in cash in a carrier bag under his bed that he wanted to invest. And I'm like, yeah.
It was normal, right? Culturally normal.
It
still
was.
is in some countries. But
it was quite normal, because a lot of people didn't trust the banks and still don't trust the banks for their money. And it's very difficult then to, like now, I mean, if you try and pay cash even to buy a car for £5,000 or something, it flags up because you're using cash. So yeah, it does.
It's a completely changing world, isn't it? Now, some countries aren't using cash at all, right? Sweden, China to some extent, and and that's another trend, right? I mean, China's becoming more of a cashless society, although I'm not sure how much that affects our side of this business. But so got a question. Then, does it have to be in bank account only? That's a good question, actually, because I think, though, would it be possible, let's say if somebody had money in a Chinese, I don't know, pension account, or like a Chinese investment account, is it possible to transfer from one to the other to a foreign company, or would they have to
There's a question. I think that would be very difficult, because obviously that would come down to the rules and regulations of the Chinese investment firm or wherever that money is, what their rules and regulations are about transferring that money out and where it's going to. I'm sure they probably follow some very strict rules and regulations. So I see somebody mentioned about Alipay. I mean, there's money in those, and there's the other thing, of course, is the Bitcoin type things as well, which we don't get involved in at all, because I mean, I'm of an older generation. I just don't understand that stuff. And I know that's a concern for China as well, because that's interesting how they would be able to control that with money going out via Bitcoin when it's actually as such is avoiding bank transfers as such. So for us, I mean, we will work on a case-by-case basis, but I mean, in general, the money that we're transferring is coming from a bank in China, and then it's coming through our banking system within Hong Kong and then out into the wide world. So I would think it'd be quite difficult. I would have thought if somebody had money in an investment in China, they would probably have to encash it as such and put it into a Chinese bank. Look at moving it, but it does depend. It does depend how they're set up.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a Chinese investment firm that have international arms to it, there may be a way of doing internal transfers and so.
So basically, case by case, but
it's definitely case by case anyway, because even some of the clients that you and me talk about on a regular basis, every one of them is different, and they have different requirements and maybe a different setup. So we do look at it each one and say, yes, we can do that. No, we can't do this, and we just have to work with what we've got, really.
Absolutely.
It's very hard to just give a blanket answer to any of these sort of things.
Sure. But I'm guessing when it comes to Hong Kong, it's much easier because we do have some people who reach out to us. And indeed, we had a question before the webinar. Some people have obviously a branch in Hong Kong. And I'm guessing if the money is in a Hong Kong bank account, even though, of course, this could always change, it's much easier.
Yeah, soon by the look of it.
Yeah, maybe. So that's another
From what I've been reading today, yeah, that could be quite soon.
But Hong Kong, Macau, it's easiest for now.
Yes, it is easier, and obviously it does make. I mean, there's still some guidelines in there and some structures that we have to abide by, but yeah, it is easier, and that tends to be what happened. Is that if we've got money in China, it does go via Hong Kong and then out to wherever it's going. So yeah, that's where the transfer kind of happens.
Absolutely, and yeah, it will be interesting to see if that changes that now with the news we're seeing today and yesterday. But I'm going to talk also briefly about the processes, because we had a question about well, if someone kills two birds with one stone by doing an investment and also going for a currency company, what are the processes? So basically, in terms of the processes, I'll talk about the investment side, and Andy could talk about the currency side. Let's say if someone wants to do a lump sum investing from China. Now, a lump sum, unfortunately, unless you're really, really wealthy or high income, most people can't pay 50,000 or 100,000 from the credit card, right? So when it comes to lump sums, often you have to use a bank transfer anyway. When it comes to monthly investment accounts, it is possible with some providers that we have access to basically pay from your Chinese Visa or MasterCard. Union Pay is hard at the moment, but basically the way it works is people, like all investment accounts around the world, proof of address, proof of ID, application form, whatever. To cut a long story short, if your monthly premium is between 500 to 1,000 a month, it's much less likely there's going to be any problems. If you're looking to invest, say, 3,000 a month or something, it's more likely the Chinese card issuer will flag it and just question where it's coming from. But also it depends on the provider. I've heard Construction Bank is a bit different to ICBC, but basically, because it's coming out of your account as like a bill payment, it's usually fine. And indeed, even when it comes to local Chinese people, there's a huge market in terms of just paying on card for foreign investments. But in terms of larger investments, then Andy, I know we've kind of talked about this before, but regardless of whether someone's just putting their money into a bank account in another country or doing an investment, so the basic process will be for you, proof of address, proof of ID, source of wealth if it's a big amount, and then you put them in contact with your currency partners. So if we talk about like the process from like day one until the end, what I know each process is a bit different, but what's the approximate steps people have to take?
Right. I mean, what would normally happen is, for example, if you would set up the investment and you would be given a plan number, for example, ready for that money to be added to that plan, we would use that as a reference number. So if the client would set up an account with us to transfer the money, we would receive the money, change it to whatever currency is required for your investment. Within that that's being sent to the investment company, there would be a reference number which would be their name plus the plan number, for example. And I know from the investment company's point of view, they also need to see a trail, paper trail, to see where the money is coming from. So they'll have, from the currency company, they'll have confirmation it's come from the client's bank account, it's gone through our system, and then onto them. So that covers all the needs that they require. And for us, I mean, it's a straightforward transfer, really. It's almost going from bank to bank, because it will go to the investment company's bank rather than the client's bank in another country. So it's a straightforward conversion as such. If it's going to be $100,000 or something, for example, we would tell the client how much they need to send in RMB or whatever it is to transfer 100,000. They send that money, it goes to Hong Kong, exchange dollars, and then sent same day to the bank account of the investment company. And it's a simple, straightforward transaction. And paperwork's all there to show where it's gone and how it got there. That should cover everything.
So yeah, the bottom line is really, if you can show where the money's come from, if it's a larger amount, you can easily set up an expat investment, and it's not a problem. In terms of straight transfers then, let's say someone just wants to send money back to the UK to buy a property, or just to leave it in a bank account in the UK or in our country, whereas Malaysia, whatever. I guess it's a very similar process. And also, do you usually actually go into the bank with the people, or do you just say to them, well, look, here's what you have to do, here's the account you have to send the money to, or do some of your agents actually physically go into the bank to make the transfer if it's not going to be an online transfer?
No, I mean, in vast majority of cases, it's online, but it does depend sometimes on what limit the client has to do online banking. They may have to go into the bank. We don't normally need to send anybody with them. It's a matter of saying, okay, this is how much you need to send. Hopefully they know in advance whether they can do that online. They've got to, it depends on what the bank's allowing them to do online as a one-off lump sum, or they just have to go into their bank and sign the paperwork to transfer that money. They would be given all the details what they need to do anyway in advance. They can talk to one of the agents without an issue, and if need be, meet up with one if it's convenient to talk through how it all works. That's not an issue at all. And again, it is a case-by-case basis. I mean, some people are okay with using online facilities, others don't want to do that and almost like want that hand holding right the way through the process, and we can do whatever. It's not an issue.
Because one interesting thing about the banks in China is some of them, it depends which city you live in, but they're not always that efficient if you go into the branch, because some of them don't even know the policies of exactly what's allowed, right? So I think online is good from the point of view that surely it goes to some kind of, I don't know, centralized system where it gets approved. Whereas if you go into the branch, you could get someone who's really knowledgeable, or you could get someone who's new to the bank who has no idea.
It'd be very hit and miss.
Yeah, I can imagine. And we've got another question here about, can I know about fees as well? Now, I imagine that fees, it's tiered, right? So when it comes to currency transfers, if someone's got 100 grand compared to 1 million, or a business has got 20 million, I guess that's going to make a difference. And it's not always, it's case by case as well, depending on maybe the situation.
Yeah, and also, unfortunately, it's bad news for China. It costs. There's a lot of fees that are actually fixed that we have to pay transfers. I mean, for example, if I was moving a client £100,000 to, let's say, dollars, I would charge them less than 1% on their exchange rate. For China, there are a lot of fixed fees. I mean, to be honest, it can range anything probably between 4.5% and 6.5%.
But it depends on the amount, because
it does depend on the amount, and also does depend on how much work's involved. It depends. I mean, again, it's by case. If it's an individual, and let's say they're moving $100,000 worth of, we will probably be looking. It's probably going to cost about 5.5%, give or take. But that's just the way it is.
What
about that is fixed?
If a business has maybe, for example, they're like millions, or like, say, for example, 20,000 a month, I guess it makes a big difference, right?
Yeah, we can, because I mean, we're not making that much out of this. This is the thing. It sounds like huge amounts. And it does to me, because I'm so used to charging clients 0.5%, 1% on the exchange rates. So it seems a lot to me, but it's just, there's so many fixed fees involved that a lot of, when I say, oh, it's going to be 5.5%, you can probably guarantee that probably at least 4% of that is fixed fees. So
that's
not a lot
bad.
we can do about it.
For
China. Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, I've spoken to certain clients, and some will say, well, that's quite a lot, and others say, well, that's a bargain, I'll do it. It does depend on their previous experience.
I've been quoted 20 to 35%.
Right.
Really?
To try and to go into Japanese yen from Chinese yuan, the bank, both ICBC and SBD charged around 25 to 35.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that was the fee, and it's so it's just plain ludicrous.
So I mean, in that case, we would be looking at charging 5.5%. It would be. And we can go to most currencies in the world, so shouldn't be too many. I mean, there are a few exceptions, obviously, but again, we keep saying this, but it is a case-by-case basis for everybody that we speak to, because none of them are the same. There are things, certain currencies that people want, certain amounts. and also their situation at that time. So we're happy to talk to people and say, okay, let's have a look at your situation. And we're very upfront with everything. So this is the fee, and if they're happy with that, we go ahead. There are no surprises further down the line. We don't sort of say, oh, by the way, there's another 10% charge. Once we've done it, it's that we will tell them upfront how much it is, and that's it.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. And we probably have time for one more question before calling it a day. But this is actually a good question. It says, any countries you can't transfer to or open, or any currency. So I guess when it comes to countries like Iran that are sanctioned by the US, maybe that's an issue, maybe, for example.
I've actually got a list up here that I can't send to, so I can read them quickly. Cuba, Iran, Libya, North Korea, South Sudan, Sudan, and Syria.
Okay.
They definitely can't touch them at all. There's certain other currencies that we can, but they can be difficult. Certain currencies that are closed currencies. I mean, for example, we can send rupees into India, but it's very hard to transfer the other way because of a closed currency. Brazil's very similar with the real. We can send money into Brazil, but it's very difficult getting it out. And Malaysia and Singapore have been like that on and off for quite a few years, where it's sort of sometimes you can move it easily and other times it's not so easy. So, but there's only a few. I mean, those countries are listed are the ones that we definitely can't deal with. Clients either accounts there or sending money to it or from it. So, but that's it. Most of the other countries, not a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's quite standard anyway. I mean, financial services now can't deal with certain countries like, well, Syria to an extent, but the American sanctioned countries, because they make it so difficult, right? So that's quite normal, isn't it? So pretty standard, yeah. Okay, well, it's been a good session. What I'm going to do as well is, I know a lot of you have emailed me beforehand. You know, I'll introduce you to Andy if you request and so on, or whatever you want to do. I hope it's been useful for you guys, and I really appreciate your time on a Friday. And also thank Andy and Henry as well for joining us. And also, if you have any other questions, I think most of you have my email anyway, or my WhatsApp or whatever. You can just ping over a question. And hope you all have a good day and a good weekend. Hopefully you're not all in lockdown, right? I know you are, Andy, though, aren't you?
Yeah, still in lockdown.
UK is worse than almost any country in the world now, isn't it, for lockdown? But hopefully it'll be ending. I'm due back in the UK actually next month, but hopefully it'll be better by then.
Oh, good luck with that. 14-day quarantine by the time you get here.
It might well be. So I'm going to try to avoid that, flying 1 or 2 days before, hopefully. But let's see.
Yeah.
It's going to be June 1st, right? I think UK quarantine.
Yeah, I think that's what they're talking about. I think it'll be loose anyway, because it's not like they're sending you somewhere for a 14-day quarantine.
No, it's
expect you to do a 14-day quarantine.
Yeah.
And that's why we've got so many dead.
Maybe the death capital of the world, right? Or almost. So, all right, guys, take it easy then, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Cheers.